Elvis Presley stepped off the train in Los Angeles, his 22nd birthday, a cake in one hand and a suitcase in the other. It was a special day, not just because it was his birthday, but because it marked the start of something new. He was about to begin filming his second movie, and the excitement was palpable. The band, his loyal friends and musical partners, were with him, and they had even thrown a birthday party on the train. Candles flickered, and the cake was a simple but sweet reminder that, despite the fame, he was still just a kid at heart. Traveling by train had become a routine for Elvis. He had a deep fear of flying, partly because of a scary experience when a charter plane nearly ran out of fuel on a trip to Nashville. But the real reason he preferred trains was his mother, Gladys. She worried about him constantly, and if taking the train made her feel better, he was more than willing to oblige. The long journeys gave him time to think and catch up on much-needed sleep. It was a trade-off he was happy to make. Hal Wallis, a legendary producer in Hollywood, was behind Elvis's new movie. He had a vision to create a film that captured the essence of Elvis, the real Elvis. To achieve this, Wallis sent the screenwriter and director, Hal Cantor, to Memphis to spend time with Elvis's family. The goal was to make the character as authentic as possible. The songs for the movie were carefully selected, with the Aberbox, Elvis's music publishers, asking their best writers to pitch ideas. One of the standout songs was Loving You, a ballad so good that it became the title of the film. Recording the songs was a different story. Elvis had struggled with the sterile environment of the soundstage at Paramount. He found it hard to capture the energy and spontaneity that came naturally when he performed with his band. They were used to improvising, playing by ear, and working things out on the fly. After several frustrating days, Wallis finally relented and allowed Elvis to return to radio recorders, a studio where he felt more at home. There, they could experiment and create the music they loved. During these sessions, Elvis met Dudley Brooks, a talented pianist who became a key part of his Hollywood recording. Brooks was a jazz musician with a versatile style, and he brought a new dimension to Elvis's music. Together, they recorded songs like Blueberry Hill and One Night, a rhythm and blues hit that almost became a hit single until concerns about its suggestive lyrics led to a rewrite. Elvis's appearance was also changing. A Paramount hairdresser suggested that he dye his hair black to look better in Technicolor. Elvis, always open to new ideas, agreed. The transformation was immediate, and his jet black hair became a signature look. However, it also meant that his image was becoming more fixed, making it harder for him to change as the years went on. Filming Loving You was an experience that blended the real and the fantastical. Elizabeth Scott, Wendell Corey, and a young Dolores Hart were his co-stars. Dolores, an innocent and talented actress, often watched Elvis perform on set, her presence a reminder of the purity that still existed in Hollywood. Off-camera, Elvis found himself navigating a world of fame and isolation. He was a young, single man in a city full of opportunities, but he felt out of place among the established actors. Instead of joining the Hollywood scene, he turned to his trusted friends and family, forming a small but loyal group that included his cousins, Junior and Gene Smith. Elvis's fame was a double-edged sword. It brought him the world's attention, but it also created a barrier between him and the people he wanted to connect with. He was the king of rock and roll, a title that both honored and isolated him. Despite the pressure, he remained grounded, always mindful of his roots and the people who had supported him. When he wasn't filming, Elvis focused on his new home. His parents, Vernon and Gladys, had found a house called Graceland, a sprawling estate just outside Memphis. It was a place where he could be himself, away from the prying eyes of the public. Graceland became more than just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where Elvis could dream and create. The journey to Graceland marked a new chapter in his life, one where he could finally have a space to call his own. As he stood at the gates of Graceland, Elvis felt a sense of pride and responsibility. This was his kingdom, and he was ready to build his legacy. The road ahead was uncertain, but with his family and friends by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Elvis had hit a place in his career where gold records were almost a joke to him. He had earned so many that they seemed to multiply like magic. But deep down, he couldn't help but think of the story of King Midas, where everything he touched turned to gold, including his daughter. Elvis wondered if his story would end badly, too. His mother, Gladys, often reminded him of a Bible verse. "What doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and loses his soul?" It was a thought that lingered in his mind. Elvis was about to receive another gold record for All Shook Up, a song written by Otis Blackwell. The song hit #1 in the US and Britain, and it seemed like a natural step for him to tour England. However, whenever Elvis mentioned it to the Colonel, his manager showed no interest. The Colonel had his own plans. In Hollywood, Elvis was constantly busy. Before his movie, Loving You, was even released, he was already at MGM Studios to start work on Jailhouse Rock. He was paid $250,000 and would get half the profits. The movie was in black and white, which Elvis thought was a cost-cutting measure, but he liked the gritty script and the character he played. He was excited to work on it. Recording for Jailhouse Rock didn't start smoothly. Elvis began the session by singing spirituals with the Jordanaires, a group of backup singers, to warm up his voice. When he returned to the piano after lunch and started another hymn, he found himself singing alone. The MGM executive in charge had told the Jordanaires not to join in, thinking it would make Elvis focus more. Elvis saw this as a lack of understanding and left the studio, taking his friends with him. He felt like they thought he was just a singing machine. After a couple of days, he cooled off and recorded Jailhouse Rock, which became a huge hit. At the studio, Elvis met songwriters Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. They were young and talented, having written hits like Kansas City and Searchin'. They were surprised to find that Elvis was as passionate about rhythm and blues as they were. They wrote Treat Me Nice and Don't for Elvis, and he recorded both. Don't became a big hit, but Elvis thought Treat Me Nice would be even bigger. He was wrong, but the collaboration was fruitful. Elvis asked Leiber and Stoller to write a love song for him, and they came back with Don't. They also wrote a raunchy Christmas song called Santa Claus Is Back in Town, which Elvis recorded despite its controversial lyrics. The Colonel didn't like that Elvis worked directly with Leiber and Stoller, as it bypassed his usual business channels. He warned Elvis that he was throwing away money, but Elvis didn't care. When the Colonel got into one of his moods, Elvis would just let it go, feeling ungrateful for the Colonel's efforts. Off camera, things weren't as smooth with Elvis's band. Now that Elvis was making millions, the band members who appeared in Jailhouse Rock weren't earning as much. Bill Black, the bass player, struggled with a new Fender electric bass guitar, and Elvis ended up playing the bass part himself. This created tension within the band. Scotty Moore, the guitarist, also felt left out when Elvis played lead guitar on One Night. The Jordanaires, Elvis's backup singers, faced issues too. Elvis found out they had worked with Tab Hunter on a song that outsold one of Elvis's records. He accused them of disloyalty, but later apologized. Elvis was often jealous and possessive of those around him. Elvis had always said that fame wouldn't change him, but now he realized that once you taste fame, you're never the same. At 22, he was living in his own mansion, Graceland, with his parents. He bought a tractor to drive around the grounds, and his uncles worked as gatekeepers to manage the fans. His mother, Gladys, was happy to have him home, but worried about his future, especially the possibility of him being drafted into the military. Elvis's life was a mix of fame, family, and relationships. He had many girls in his life, including Anita Wood, a blonde beauty queen who sang and became a regular at Graceland. His mother hoped he would settle down, but that seemed unlikely. Despite his success, Elvis was pressured to make a Christmas album, which he didn't want to do. The Colonel insisted, and it turned out to be one of his biggest-selling records. Fame was a double-edged sword, bringing both joy and challenges. Elvis Presley was in a tough spot. He didn't want to release his version of Blue Christmas, because he thought RCA would never put it out due to his unique singing style. But it was his take on White Christmas that caused the biggest stir. Irving Berlin, the song's writer, asked radio stations not to play Elvis's version. This made Elvis feel pretty upset, especially since he didn't know that Berlin had similar complaints about Clyde McPhatter's version a couple of years earlier. During a 3-day recording session, things got even more complicated. Scotty and Bill, Elvis's longtime bandmates, were feeling underpaid. They suggested making an instrumental album with Elvis on the piano to earn some extra money. Elvis didn't object, and they booked studio time. But when Colonel Parker found out, he shut it down, citing legal issues. This left Elvis feeling embarrassed and stuck in the middle. Scotty and Bill left for Memphis, and a day later, Elvis got a letter of resignation from them. It was a tough situation, and Elvis felt torn between his friends and his manager. Elvis tried to make things right by calling Scotty and asking what it would take for them to come to an agreement. Scotty said they wanted an extra $50 a week and a $10,000 settlement. Elvis agreed to think about it and told Vernon and the Colonel. However, Scotty and Bill had already talked to the Memphis newspaper about their reasons for quitting. This made things even more difficult. The Colonel advised Elvis to reply through an open letter in another newspaper, wishing them good luck but saying it was too late to work things out. Elvis was unhappy about the whole situation, feeling that it was a big mistake. Elvis had promised to play a benefit for the Elvis Presley Youth Center in Tupelo. He had to hire new musicians for the show, and even though it went well, he missed the security of having Scotty and Bill with him. A few days later, Elvis asked Tom Diskin to offer Scotty and Bill $250 a show to come back for some dates in California and Hawaii. They agreed, and the band reunited, but things were never quite the same. On the long drive from Memphis to Los Angeles, they listened to the radio and heard a lot of new, exciting music. Elvis wondered if people would still remember him after he was drafted. He was also worried about how his voice might change during his time in the Army. He knew that vocal cords needed regular exercise, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up his singing while serving. When they got to the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles, Elvis was determined to show everyone the real him. He performed with all his energy, moving across the stage and even jumping onto the RCA mascot dog. Some critics said he looked like he was pretending to hump the dog, but Elvis insisted he was just working the audience. Elvis had to deal with a lot of criticism, especially from Frank Sinatra, who called rock and roll rancid and ugly. Elvis tried to stay cool, saying that every generation had its own music and that Sinatra had been part of a trend in his day. But inside, he was steaming. He knew he couldn't please everyone, and he went back on stage to do his act, even as the Los Angeles Police Department Vice Squad warned the Colonel that Elvis would have to clean up his show or face consequences. After the show, Elvis spent the last weeks of 1957 at Graceland, taking care of the house and hanging out with his friends. He rented the Memphian Theater to watch movies with them, and sometimes played games at the fairground or roller rink. His entourage was growing, and he had to set some boundaries to keep things under control. Elvis's mother, Gladys, was often in her housecoat and slippers, not feeling well and worried about her son being drafted. She played his hymns EP, Peace in the Valley, over and over, fearing he might be sent overseas. Elvis told reporters he was proud to serve his country and wanted to be treated like a regular GI. He chose the Army, which agreed to a deferment until late March 1958. Despite the gifts and good times, it was a sad and tense Christmas for the Presley family. Elvis's life became a whirlwind of excitement and generosity after he put his uncertainties behind him. He started playing a dangerous game called War, where he and his friends would divide into teams and throw lit fireworks at each other. It was risky, but the thrill was something he craved. Alongside this, a new side of Elvis emerged. He began giving away $100 bills to anyone around him, from friends to delivery boys. He believed that sharing his wealth was the true value of money, saying, "I'm lucky to be in a position to give. It really is a gift to be able to give." It seemed like he was trying to balance out the easy accumulation of wealth by being as generous as he could. With the U.S. Army looming, everything sped up. Hal Wallis and Paramount wanted another movie, and RCA needed new recordings to keep Elvis's music flowing while he was away. Right after his 23rd birthday, Elvis headed back to Los Angeles to start recording. The next movie was based on Harold Robbins's book, A Stone for Danny Fisher, but the lead character was changed to a singer to fit Elvis. The title was also changed to King Creole, when Leiber and Stoller wrote a song by that name. For a week, Elvis recorded the new songs for the movie. This time, the band included a Dixieland group, along with Scotty and Bill. Leiber and Stoller were there at first, but they left after a fallout with Colonel Parker. Parker didn't like anyone else discussing Elvis's projects, And when Leiber and Stoller suggested Elvis for a role in a Broadway musical, Parker got angry. They never worked with Elvis again after that. Elvis made King Creole without much fuss, following Parker's directions. The director, Michael Curtiz, was a famous filmmaker, and the cast included Walter Matthau and Dolores Hart. The movie was set in New Orleans, and Elvis even sang a song called Crawfish with jazz singer Kitty White. The film turned out to be the best one Elvis ever made, and he even got to be photographed with Sophia Loren sitting on his knee. But then, everything changed. Elvis spent his last night in Memphis buying new records and hanging out at the Rollerdrome with his friends. On the morning of March 24th, he and his family, along with his girlfriend Anita, went to the draft board. He was given a medical check and a serial number, becoming Private Presley US 53,310,761. The media was everywhere, and Colonel Parker handed out King Creole balloons. Elvis was nervous, but tried not to show it. He waved goodbye to the fans and cameras, understanding that the other recruits and their families were feeling the same way. After some tests and a haircut, which was filmed by newsreel cameras, Elvis looked just as handsome with his new short hair. He handled the press conference with grace, answering questions about his future in the Army and his plans for female company. He wanted to be seen as an ordinary young American, even though he was far from it. Basic training at Fort Hood in Texas was tough, but Elvis was determined to fit in. He bought lunch for his fellow recruits and joked with them, trying to make the best of his time. He was proud when he completed a difficult route march, and the exercise helped him lose weight, which looked good on him. The hardest part was the psychological adjustment. He felt lonely, even though he was surrounded by people. A sympathetic recruit sergeant, Bill Norwood, and a former disc jockey, Eddie Faddle, helped him cope. Faddle became a friend, and Elvis visited his home during his free time, feeling sad and low. After 10 weeks of basic training, Elvis got a 14-day furlough. He drove home in his black Cadillac, bought a new red Lincoln convertible, and spent time with his family. He went back to work, recording a single night session at RCA Nashville studio. Wearing his Army uniform, he recorded 5 hit singles, including A Fool Such As I and A Big Hunk O' Love. The session was a huge success, and RCA was thrilled. Elvis was happy too, but Parker grumbled about the instrumentation, wanting Elvis's voice to be more prominent. Elvis's time in the Army was challenging, but he was determined to make the best of it. Despite the loneliness and the pressure, he found ways to connect with his fellow soldiers and stay true to himself. His music continued to reach his fans, and he remained a beloved figure, even as he adjusted to his new life in the military. Elvis was back at Fort Hood for more advanced tank driving lessons. He had been assigned to the 3rd Armored Division, known as Hell on Wheels, which was set to deploy to West Germany in September, but Elvis had a plan. According to Army rules, soldiers could live off base if they had dependents in the area. Elvis knew his family, his parents, Vernon and Gladys, and his grandmother relied on him for financial support. So by mid-June, he rented a house in Killeen, Texas, and moved his family and his friend Lamar Fike in with him. Things were looking up. Elvis had received good reviews for his role in the movie King Creole, and the single Hard-Headed Woman from the film hit #1 on the U.S. charts. Away from the base, where he had to be careful what he said, Elvis could finally relax and talk openly about his feelings toward Army life, but his happiness was short-lived. In early August, Gladys fell ill and needed hospital treatment for hepatitis. Elvis drove her and Vernon to the train station in Killeen, and 3 days later, her doctor in Memphis, who had warned her about drinking, sent an urgent message. Elvis applied for leave, but the Army initially denied it, not wanting to give him special treatment. When Gladys's condition worsened and Elvis threatened to go AWOL, her doctor, an ex-Army medic, intervened and leave was granted. Elvis flew to Memphis and rushed to the Methodist hospital. When he saw Gladys, she was pleased to see him. "Oh, my son, she said, looking a bit better." She was upset when he told her he had flown, as she still hated the idea of him flying. The next day, Elvis stayed with her from morning until midnight, promising to return the next morning. But at 3:30 a.m., Vernon called. "I knew what it was before I even answered the phone." Elvis would later say Gladys was dead. He raced to the hospital, and Lamar Fike followed in another car. When Lamar caught up, he heard Elvis and Vernon sobbing hysterically in Gladys's room. Elvis, who usually maintained his dignity, couldn't hide his raw emotions. The following morning, he and Vernon sat outside Graceland, crying together as reporters and photographers walked up the drive. "She was all we lived for," Elvis said. "She was always my best girl. When Mama was feeling bad, we used to walk her up and down the driveway here to help her feel better." Elvis wore a white shirt with frills, which some might have found inappropriate, but it was a shirt Gladys had liked. In the days that followed, he barely slept, and a doctor had to give him tranquilizers. When Gladys's body, dressed in a pale blue dress she had never worn, was brought to Graceland, Elvis seemed to revert to a childlike state. "Mama, you never would dress up for me, and now here you are dressed up in the most beautiful gown," he said, touching her hands and feet and combing her hair. Eddie Faddle, who arrived from Texas, was invited to come close. "Mama, here's Eddie. You know Eddie. You met him in Killeen," Elvis said. He kept talking to her, asking her to wake up and talk to him. The funeral director eventually had to cover the coffin with glass to stop Elvis from touching her. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, found the scene chaotic and ordered Graceland to be cleared. Elvis refused. "These people are my friends," he told Parker. Parker backed off, but convinced Elvis and Vernon that the funeral couldn't take place at Graceland due to the large crowd expected. On August 15th, Gladys's funeral was held at the Memphis Funeral Home. The Blackwood Brothers, Elvis's favorite gospel quartet, sang about 12 hymns because Elvis kept requesting more. J.D. Sumner, the bass singer, said he had never seen anyone suffer as much as Elvis did over his mother's loss. At the cemetery, with over 4,000 people present, Elvis's sobbing worsened. As the coffin was lowered, he tried to reach it, and Lamar had to pull him back. "People are watching you," Lamar whispered, but Elvis didn't care. Later, when Dixie Locke, a former girlfriend, visited Graceland, Elvis talked to her about Gladys and their past. Dixie suggested he give up his career for a quieter life, but Elvis shook his head. "There are too many people that depend on me now," he said. "I'm too obligated, I'm in too far to get out." Elvis and Vernon decided not to have an autopsy, and it was generally accepted that Gladys had died from a heart attack due to cirrhosis of the liver. She was 44. For 23 years, she had lived for her son, pushing him to stay in school, encouraging his singing, and welcoming his fans. She had been shrewd, too, and never trusted Colonel Parker, worrying that Elvis had sold his talents to a man who only loved money. Now, Elvis wouldn't have her voice of reason. The inscription on her gravestone read, "She was the sunshine of our home," a reference to the song she used to sing to Elvis when he was a child. Before returning to Fort Hood, Elvis left instructions that nothing of Gladys's should be moved from where it was when she died. Vernon, Grandma, and Lamar returned to the house in Killeen to be near him. 5 weeks after Gladys's death, Elvis and his unit took a troop train to New York, where they would board a ship to West Germany. At the quayside in Brooklyn, Elvis was given a press conference. He was in his usual respectful mood until a reporter asked if he would sell Graceland. "No, sir," he replied, "because that was my mother's home." When asked to say more about his mother, Elvis spoke openly. "I suppose since I was an only child, we might have been a little closer than most. Everyone loves their mother, but I was an only child, and she was always there for me. Losing her was like losing a friend, a companion, someone to talk to. I could wake her up any hour of the night if I was worried or troubled, and she'd try to help me. I used to get angry at her when I was growing up, but later I realized she was right. She was only trying to protect me. I'm very happy she was strict with me." Elvis then gave a message to his fans and walked up and down the gangplank for the photographers before boarding the USS General George M. Randall and setting sail for Europe. In West Germany, Elvis's 17 months seemed like a banishment from the world he knew. It was the height of the Cold War, and the U.S. Army took its role seriously. Elvis, despite his misgivings, was proud to do his part. He believed in America and the military. He liked the uniform and the badges. But he alternated between wanting to be just another soldier and feeling like he never would be. "I gotta act like one of the guys, but it ain't easy being one of the guys. I ain't never been one of the guys, and I never will be," he complained. Despite his grumbling, this break from show business was a much-needed rest. Since 1955, his workload had been overwhelming. Now his main job was driving a Jeep, and going on maneuvers. He lived in a rented house in Bad Nauheim with his family and friends, and soon the parties resumed, with German girls and new army friends like Rex Mansfield, Joe Esposito, and Charlie Hodge. Even in Germany, Elvis couldn't escape his fame. German fans discovered where he was, and would surround any cafe he visited. A sign was put up outside his house, stating that autographs would be signed between 7:30 and 8 every evening. But Lamar and Red, who were already good at copying his signature, sometimes signed the books left overnight. Elvis's time in Germany was a mix of duty and a break from the relentless demands of his career. He made new friends, found some peace, and in his own way honored the memory of his mother. Elvis's time in Germany wasn't about exploring new places or learning a new language. He was more interested in music and the fun things he could do off-duty. He went to see Bill Haley perform and watched the Holiday on Ice show, where he enjoyed the pretty girls skating in short dresses. Before joining the Army, Elvis was worried his voice might change, but luck was on his side. Charlie Hodge, a friend who knew a lot about singing, started teaching him. Charlie showed Elvis breathing techniques and encouraged him to sing more and develop his high notes. They would sing hymns and listen to new songs sent from America by Elvis's girlfriend, Anita, and his music publishers. Elvis even said he did more singing in the Army than he would have if he was working on it. Elvis didn't have to sing the same songs over and over. He hired a piano and bought a tape recorder to try out different songs. This way he was ready to go back to the studio when his time in the Army was over. He even asked for new lyrics to be written for the Italian song, O Sole Mio. This song would later become his biggest hit, It's Now or Never. Despite waking up early for his Army duties, Elvis spent his off-duty time at home, just like he did at Graceland. His friends, Lamar and Red, took care of his uniforms and other chores. He watched movies, played touch football, and listened to music late at night on the American Forces Network. The colonel, his manager, sent him regular updates to keep his name in the public eye. Elvis wrote letters to Anita, promising to marry her if she stayed clean and wholesome, but he wasn't always faithful. He told a friend he was seeing a German girl who looked like Bridget Bardot. Later, he started dating Elizabeth Stefaniak, a pretty German girl who spoke English. She moved in with Elvis and his family to help with the fan mail. Elvis and Elizabeth spent a lot of time together, but he didn't want her to date anyone else. He watched her closely to make sure she wasn't getting too close to his friends. Elvis was a big car enthusiast and bought himself a BMW sports car, a Cadillac for his father Vierunen, and another vehicle for his friends. He loved driving at night and taking girls home, but he was careful to stay out of trouble. Vernon, now a widower, started dating Dee Stanley, a serviceman's wife. This upset Elvis, who thought Dee was a gold digger. The noise from Vernon's bedroom made Elvis so uncomfortable that he would play the piano to drown it out. Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu, a 14-year-old girl, through a friend at the PX. She was beautiful and didn't seem intimidated by him. They spent a lot of time together, and Elvis even drove to her parents' house to reassure them. Priscilla was young, and Elvis liked the idea of shaping her. He gave her amphetamines to stay awake, but she said she didn't take them. Elvis, however, took them regularly, and it gave him a lot of energy. He would also share them with his friends, believing they were harmless. Elvis didn't travel much in Europe, but he did visit Paris a couple of times. He went to the Moulin Rouge and the Folies Bergère, and played pranks on his friends. On one trip, he saw a karate exhibition, which sparked his interest in the martial art. He also met the Golden Gate Quartet, a gospel group, and spent the evening singing spirituals with them. The day finally came when Elvis was discharged from the Army. He arrived back in the U.S. with tawny-colored hair and held a press conference. He was praised for being an excellent soldier and showed off his 3 stripes. When asked about his relationship with Priscilla, he downplayed it, saying it wasn't a big romance, but he knew it was more than that. Elvis had grown a lot during his time in the Army. He was still ambitious, but he was more mature and a bit more cynical. The boy who left for the Army had returned as a man, ready to face the challenges ahead. Elvis Presley was back in the United States, and things were starting to get a bit complicated. One of the people who had become close to him during his time in Germany was Elizabeth Stefaniak, who had been both his secretary and a sometime bedfellow. Elvis liked her a lot, so he offered her a job as his secretary at Graceland, gave her a car, and brought her to Memphis. Before they left Germany, he even asked her to smuggle a big jar of Dexedrine back to the U.S. in her suitcase. Elvis was a bit possessive, so he told Elizabeth that she could date other men. This made her sad, but she had her own secrets. Her grandmother, who liked her and saw that Elvis wasn't treating her well, had already introduced her to Rex Mansfield, Elvis's army friend. Rex was going to be Elvis's chief aide, but Elvis didn't know that Elizabeth and Rex were already seeing each other. If he had found out, he would have been furious. Elizabeth and Rex knew that if they worked for Elvis, they wouldn't be able to be together because of his jealousy. So they made a tough decision and left Graceland secretly. 3 months later, they got married. Elvis was hurt and felt betrayed. He sent them a Christmas card, but that was it. They never heard from him again. Back in Memphis, Elvis visited his mother's grave several times, feeling sad. He believed that death wasn't the end, but it was hard to accept. His old friends started coming around, bringing new girls for him to meet. Anita Wood, who he had written affectionate letters to from Germany, came to Graceland too. She would live there for 2 more years when Elvis was home, but there were always other women around when he was away. Elvis wanted to catch up on the 2 years he had missed, so he had his hair dyed black again and hired a bus to drive him and his friends to Nashville. RCA and the people at Hill and Range were hoping that Elvis still had the magic touch for picking and singing hits. They hadn't released a new single in 9 months, which was a long time for a star. So when Elvis walked into the studio, a lot was riding on his performance. Steve Scholes and Chet Atkins were supposed to be in charge, but Elvis took control. He chose the songs, rejected most of the demos, and worked until he was satisfied. Bill Black, who was now a successful band leader, wasn't there, but Scotty Moore was. They recorded 6 tracks, and Stuck on You became the new single. It was a familiar sound for the fans, and with 1 million orders waiting, it was in the charts in less than a week. Elvis traveled by train to Miami for a television appearance on the Frank Sinatra Timex show. He was paid $125,000 to sing 2 songs, and he and Sinatra harmonized on Love Me Tender. Sinatra, who had once called Elvis a cretinous goon, seemed to regret his words, especially since his daughter Nancy was friends with Elvis. They were polite to each other, but they never became close. A week after the TV show, the Nashville sessions continued. Elvis recorded 12 songs in under 12 hours, including It's Now or Never and Are You Lonesome Tonight? He also covered R&B classics and recorded songs for his friends. The result was a great album called Elvis Is Back. His voice was deeper and more controlled, and he was singing better than ever. Next, Elvis headed to Hollywood to record songs for his first post-Army film, GI Blues. He was excited about making better movies, but the script and songs weren't as good as he hoped. Most of the songs were written by Hill and Range, the publishing company run by the Aberbach brothers, who were also Elvis's partners. Only one song, Doin' the Best I Can, was really good. Elvis was unhappy, but he had to make the best of it. There were rumors that Elvis might have been offered the role of Tony in West Side Story, but his manager, Colonel Parker, turned it down. The Colonel didn't want Elvis in a movie that didn't use songs published by the Aberbachs. This was a problem because Elvis was now committed to singing mostly songs published by the Aberbachs, and they weren't always the best. Elvis tried to have fun on the set, but it sometimes looked like he was more interested in partying than in acting. He and his friends played games in the hotel and went out to nightclubs late at night. This didn't help his image as a serious actor. When he wasn't working, Elvis spent time at Graceland. His father, Vernon, had just married Dee Stanley, and Elvis was uncomfortable with the idea of Dee and his father living together in his mother's house. He gave Dee a not-so-subtle warning and was loyal to his father, even though it was hard for him. Elvis's next movie, Flaming Star, was more the kind of film he wanted to make. It was a grown-up Western about race and prejudice, and he took it seriously. He even tried brown contact lenses to look more Native American, but he didn't like them. The movie had some good potential, but there were still problems with the songs. The studio wanted some musical numbers, even though the movie was supposed to be more serious. Despite the challenges, Elvis was trying to grow as an artist and make better choices. But the industry and his manager were making it difficult. He was caught between wanting to be a serious actor and being trapped in a system that didn't always support his goals. Elvis had just returned from the army, and you'd think he'd be on top of the world. His song, It's Now or Never, was breaking records everywhere, and it would become his biggest hit ever, with over 9 million copies sold. But even with all that success, something wasn't right. Elvis had taken the lead role in a movie called Flaming Star. He thought it would be a great chance to show everyone he could act, but it didn't go as well as he hoped. The director, Don Siegel, felt that Elvis was distracted, and he kept practicing karate chops with his friends between shots. It was clear that Elvis wasn't as focused as he should have been. When Flaming Star came out, it got mixed reviews and didn't do as well as hoped. Elvis knew he had missed an opportunity. At the same time, another movie, GI Blues, was a huge hit. The album from it sold almost 3 times as many records as Elvis Is Back, a record he was very proud of. It was a bit ironic because Elvis hadn't thought much of GI Blues at first. Without his mother, Graceland wasn't the same. Elvis missed her deeply, and often talked about how much she meant to him. He had promised her that he would record a whole album of gospel songs, and in October he kept that promise. He recorded 14 gospel tracks in a single overnight session. For Elvis, gospel music was the purest thing on earth, and he sang with a passion that showed how much it meant to him. Elvis's personality was a mix of contradictions. He was generous, often giving away his jewelry or buying cars for his friends and staff. But he could also be jealous and had a quick temper. His behavior was a mix of his religious upbringing and the pressure of fame. Sometimes he could be as crude as any man, but other times he would quote the Bible like a pastor. In 1960, another movie called Wild in the Country was added to his schedule. The script was written by Clifford Odets, and the director, Philip Dunn, had recently had a hit. The movie was about a poor, sullen boy with a hidden talent for writing. Elvis was excited about the role because he always wished he had more education. However, the movie turned out to be another disappointment. The script kept changing, and songs were added that shifted the tone of the film. Elvis's temper was bad, and he felt that the movie wasn't what he had hoped for. Elvis was now living in a house on the millionaire's Bel Air estate. He was the biggest star in music, but nothing felt as fun as it did before he went to the army. His group of friends, known as the Memphis Mafia, tried to keep him entertained. They wore matching black cashmere suits and dark glasses, but Elvis hated the name, thinking it made them look seedy. Graceland had become a little fiefdom, with relatives and friends living nearby. Elvis made all the rules, from no cooking fish to no old cars in the driveway. He was only 25, but he felt like the patriarch of the clan. He loved being in control, even if he felt that his career was being managed by Colonel Parker. Elvis found that performing on stage lifted his spirits. In early 1961, he did a benefit concert in Memphis for local charities. He also visited a prison to see Johnny Bragg, a singer who had inspired him. Then he did another concert in Honolulu to raise money for the USS Arizona Memorial. It was a great night, but Elvis didn't know it would be the last time he would hear the screams of thousands of fans. He wouldn't perform in public again until 1969, and by then, the music world had changed. Elvis had a complex relationship with Hollywood. He wanted to be a great actor, but the movies he made didn't satisfy him. He once said, "I didn't have any say-so in it all." It was a simple way of saying that, despite his fame, he felt like he wasn't in control of his own destiny. But even with all the challenges, Elvis remained a legend, and his music continued to touch the hearts of millions.